to our sixth and final session of our annual Education Summit. Today's webinar for attacks a threat to public entities will be presented and moderated by IRMA staff members Susan Garvey, our Director of Legal Services, and Margie Zarcone, our Supervisor of Liability Claim Operations. Before we get started today, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items to ensure today's webinar is successful. First things first, if any questions, please feel free to use the question and answer tool on the Zoom feature. We will work on getting those answered throughout the session. And if for some reason there are a ton of questions, we will defer those to the end of the presentation to a question and answer period. And without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Susan. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David. Oh, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. As David said, I'm Susan Garvey, the Director of Legal Services. Margie Zarcone and I are going to moderate and present today. I'm also happy to have Denise Carreras and Craig Kaufman from the Village of Park Forest and Mike Mertens from the Village of Willowbrook, who are going to share their experiences with you of dealing with a ransomware attack and hopefully give you some lessons that they learned and some kind of suggestions about how to go through the process. So this is what we're going to talk about today. Margie's going to talk a little bit to you about the bad, the ugly, and the good, just some examples of some of the cases, some of the things that have happened to government and governmental agencies as far as ransomware attacks and other types of computer attacks. Denise and Craig will tell you their story. I'll go over what exposures there are out there. What are your cyber exposures? Mike will then tell you his story. I will then go over what IRMA's coverage is and how that all works. And Margie will walk you through a claim. I'm going to turn it over to Margie.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Let's go over the bad and the ugly first. Statistics show that criminals are pocketing an estimated $1.5 trillion annually. So it's no surprise that cyber attacks are on the rise with devastating effects on organizations. In 2019, there were over 15.1 billion records breached, with ransom demands reaching as high as $8.5 million. And cyber criminals are not only stealing data, they are now ransoming entire systems. The next two slides show that municipalities are being targeted as a perceived source of quick money. For example, Baltimore, Maryland had to partially shut down its Public Works and Parks Department. They received a ransom of $76,000. And then we have Lake City, Florida's insurer paying about $460,000 to the bad actors. And even with the encryption key they received, they still spent over a month of work and they were unable to unlock much of their data. And then Riviera Beach, Florida had a hacker seize and encrypt their data. Without their computer systems, the local police and fire departments had to manually take 911 calls, and they paid a ransom of $600,000. And on the next page, we've listed a few more examples for you. And Susan, if we can go to the next slide.
Oh, we should be there. Theft and ex-employee retaliation and
right.
hacking. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I wanted to go to the next slide.
The good.
The good, or at least the somewhat good news, is that the insurance market is responding to this new threat. There are more carriers providing cyber protection, and limits and coverages have been broadened to meet the needs of the marketplace. Susan's going to provide us with an in-depth review about cyber coverages that IRMA has been successful in purchasing for our members later in this presentation. And so now I'd like to introduce our first panelists, Denise Carreras and Craig Kaufman, to talk about their experience with a cyber attack.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending. So we were hit on August 28th of 2019. And it was the Wednesday before a long Labor Day weekend. And we initially, Craig will talk a little bit about our first, inkling that this happened. But I wanted to just start by identifying some key roles that we established really immediately, to try to limit too many fingers in the pot and to try to make this a very as manageable as we could. So Craig Kaufman is our IT administrator. He's on this call and he'll be speaking this morning. And his role was to work with cybersecurity firms to determine if proprietary or personal information had been breached. He was to determine what could be restored and a safe restore period. So based on our backup of our systems, how far back could we actually go safely to restore any information? And he was trying to determine how access was made and when that access, how somebody got in. So my role was to be copied on all communications between attorneys, the negotiators, the claims people, Irma, just everybody. And so we actually used my personal email because we were locked out of our emails. I just didn't want to be wasting a lot of dollars or time by revisiting everything by what people were doing. So that was really a key thing for us. I worked closely with the attorneys, the third-party security firm, and the negotiators. I was working, a real critical thing was how we were going to be getting people paid, and also running our AP, cutting checks, which that determined it wasn't a really high priority, but we just wanted to be able to manage that as well. And some communication with department heads. So that was my role. Tom Mick, our village manager, was to keep the board apprised, determine the village's financial ability to pay any ransom that might have been requested. At this point, we hadn't known if there was going to be ransom, and department head and employee communication. And then Mark Prees is our finance director. He was really looking at our finance, what was the max we could possibly go, handle transfer of funds, if any, manage payroll if we couldn't handle it electronically, and to develop any RFPs or RFQs for new IT support contracts. One thing I'd just like to mention at this point, we really determined early on that, so we had a technical and IT technician also, and we really determined that Craig needed to focus on all that he had to do, and to be directing the work of someone else was just not efficient for us. So we made the decision to put our IT tech on an paid administrative leave, just to really free up Craig and to help him to be able to focus on what he needed to do. And so that was just something that, we really analyzed very, very early, like within, I think, that first day, because he just needed to be everywhere and he couldn't direct the work of somebody else. So I just wanted to point out that that was an administrative decision that the village made at the time. So we wake up that morning, and Craig, do you want to take up, what you found?
Sure. Thanks, Denise. And hi, everybody. So that, well, and just to backtrack to the technician part of it, we put our technician on administrative leave because, at the time, I had determined that his login and credentials was the key factor. It was being used to compromise our systems. So, not having faith in, what he was doing or his credentials, his logins, I just didn't feel that having him a part of the remediation would be beneficial. So But yeah, going back to that day, he had called me. I got in about 9 a.m. as usual that morning, and he had determined, he got there a bit before me and determined, that some ransomware attack was happening. Some files were being encrypted. And this was actually our second ransomware attack. So unfortunately, a year before, our village manager had clicked on a file, and his laptop and some files had been encrypted as well, which kind of gave me a false sense of security at the time, because typically our user gets ransomware. The ransomware may encrypt their laptop or any network drives that they have access to. And then, once you remove the laptop from the network, wipe it clean, reinstall the operating system, restore any files that were encrypted that the user had access to, it really wasn't a big deal, back at the time a year ago. So I kind of had a false sense of security in this case, because I figured, it was going to be sort of the same thing. So while I was investigating it, it was probably an hour or two later, I was trying to find the source of it. I realized that the level that this ransomware had access to our servers was much greater than the previous year. So at that point, once I realized the severity of it and that it was encrypting, our servers to a level that it never should have had access to, that's when I went and disconnected all of our virtual servers from the hosts, from the networks. And in doing so, I believe that's what actually stopped the encryption, stopped the ransomware, because it couldn't talk back out to the network to get the security keys and things to complete its encryption. And once that connection severed, the ransomware programs typically have a self-destruct. In other words, they delete themselves from the systems, because they don't want to be caught. They don't want people to find their coding and be able to recreate, what they had done on the systems. So they leave almost no footprint or no trace of what they had done. So it makes it really difficult to track them back and investigate and find the source of it, unfortunately. So, but yeah, once I did that, I disconnected everything, the ransomware encryption stopped, and then it was just a matter of going back into the restore phase, figure out what was compromised, go to backups, restore everything that we could. So that was sort of the initial phase of it. We then contacted law enforcement. The FBI took a image of a couple of our laptops to see if they could find anything. They did not. They couldn't find any source of the ransomware or anything like that. SpearTip is a company out of St. Louis. They came to help us try to investigate. So unfortunately, in the investigation phase of it, we really couldn't determine much. We were able to determine it didn't seem that the ransomware bad actors had taken any data. All of our router logs and things did not show any large transmissions of data out of our network. So it seemed that they did just encrypt the files and hold them for ransom. So luckily, no personal information was stolen or taken from our network. But they did help also to install a next-gen antivirus solution on all of our computers, laptops across the network, servers. So on top of the Symantec endpoint or Windows Defender, the traditional antiviruses, we also deployed this next-gen antivirus, which runs in memory and watches for executables to run that might be PowerShell scripts and things like that these bad actors use. So that was SpearTip was instrumental in locking down our systems from the bad actors to give us peace of mind that we weren't going to be hit again once we got our systems up and running.
So I wanted to just make mention, when we got into work on the 28th, some employees were having trouble accessing emails and working documents on the server. By mid-morning, everybody was locked out. And so Craig started his kind of forensic type of looking. And an important note for us was that aside from our municipal software and electronic timekeeping system, our infrastructure had several proprietary software programs. And that was some software for police, for fire. We have our own recreation and parks department that had proprietary software. We have a water plant. It's a water treatment plant. So they had, a SCADA system, proprietary software there. In 2019, we had decommissioned a health department. So there was a lot of, records. We needed to, so there was software associated with that. And we also have our own housing authority. So that housing authority here had its own software, proprietary software. So that was something that Craig was just really driven in so many different areas to try to find out, what has been hacked, basically. And at the same time frame, Northwest Indiana, we were hearing that some municipalities in Northwest Indiana, like that same day or the day before, had been attacked. Texas and Missouri had been hit, and other municipalities out east. So it just seemed to come together. Did you have anything?
Denise, we got a couple questions.
Sure.
So the first question is, are you a member of the MS-ISAC, and did you contact them?
I do not know what that is, so I'm assuming we are not a member of that. What does that stand for?
Question came from Chris Holster.
Craig, are you familiar with that?
I'm not actually.
So I would say no.
All right, next question. Which next-gen software did you end up getting?
So Spear Tip is the company that is out of St. Louis, and their software is called Shadow Spear. It's sort of like a carbon black type of software, if people are familiar with that, where it's very lightweight and it runs as a service on each computer or server and simply watches the memory for any sort of executable. So for instance, if the traditional antivirus allows an executable program to run, which is a malware, any kind of virus, that program is going to run and load into memory, and while in memory try to do various functions, copy files, create a shadow copy of data, for instance. So this software runs in conjunction with those traditional antiviruses as another layer of security, where it's watching what's actually running in memory, so that it's not looking for a specific virus. For instance, the traditional antiviruses have a database of known viruses, and then they do some heuristic analysis of what they think might be a virus. Well, this software actually watches the functions that are happening in real time on a computer. And if there's any questionable function, for instance, if a Microsoft Word document is opened, and then from that Word document, a PowerShell script, is trying to run from the macros or something like that, that's not a normal type of Word document. That's not a normal usage of a Word document. So they flag it and block the process from running, and then they'll either email or call based on the level of severity that they think this might pose. We actually just had this happen earlier this week, where an account was hacked at our combined dispatch center, and that hacked account was sending out Word documents with macros trying to run PowerShell scripts, we think, which was probably ransomware. And one of our fire chief, received one of these documents, and SpearTip called me on my cell to say, hey, this looks pretty serious. You better get over there and investigate it. So it's an additional level of security, which is different than the traditional antiviruses, but in my opinion is actually more effective than the traditional antiviruses because it does stop any of these malicious processes from being able to execute on a computer, as opposed to the traditional antivirus, which may allow the executable to run, and then after the fact, after damage has already been done, start to block things.
And then quick clarification. So the MSISAC is the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. And I believe they were asking you all are a member of that.
We are not.
And then one more question for you, Craig, and it's, did you ever find out the source of the second breach?
We did not, unfortunately, find the source, but we do know that our IT technician at the time, he had credentials to access basically everything on our network, all levels of server access, domain controllers, and his credentials were compromised and then used to gain, the necessary access to encrypt to the level that they did. Another practice that came out of this now is that, we hired a company to provide the technician support. And that company now, we segment out for smaller networks where there's only one or two people, a lot of times that one or the administrator, the technician, they have access, level access to everything because it's needed. If I'm out on vacation, the technician may have to create users, in the domain, on the domain controller and things like that. But we have segmented out now the roles so that the technician, even my login, is not allowed to access domain controllers and sensitive information. We have a separate login for that, that we can change the password at any time. So just the separation of roles and duties, which is obviously always best practice, but not always practical. We definitely have implemented strategies like that to mitigate this sort of risk, where that if anybody's login is compromised, the level that the bad actors would have access to will be minimized.
Great. Thank you so much. See why he's on this call? So when we had the attack that Wednesday morning, our team, our core team met to strategize and figure out what our internal communication was going to be. Immediately, I notified Margot and Susan. They put us in touch with Hartford Steam Boiler. That's our third-party cybercrime vendor. And through HSB, we enlisted and contracted with a technical defense attorney, a cybersecurity firm, and a negotiator with a Bitcoin wallet. So in case there was ransomware, they don't do it in US dollars. Everything has to be converted to Bitcoin. So, we reviewed contracts for the above experts that were sent to us over a period of a couple of days. Craig reached out to SpearTip. They were kind of a recommended cybersecurity firm that could actually get on site here. We contacted a few of them and they were able to get on site. We are in the southern part of Chicago, just over the border of Indiana. So SpearTip was in St. Louis and they were able to drive in here, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. And one thing I thought that was really interesting is that we learned that bugs can be in our system for a while and troll, and they just keep gathering information and gathering information. It could be over a period of weeks. And once the troll has determined that it's captured enough information that might be of a monetary value, the system then shuts down. So the day of our attack doesn't mean that that was the day that something was in our system trolling. It could have been there for a while. And then that troll or whatever, who's ever managing that, will sell our information out on the dark web to the highest bidder. And then they can in turn impose ransomware. So it was just really interesting. And in working with HSB and cyber attorneys, they speak very specific language like Craig was using, you know, relative to IT in infrastructure. It was just fascinating. So, you know, we initially set up our first team conference call with attorneys. This was on Friday, the 30th, with Irma, with Hartford Steam Boiler. We set priorities for all team members. And again, we learned we needed to enlist other specialists, such as the negotiator with the BitWallet. So that was Coveware, and the cybersecurity firm to provide incident response and forensic studies, and that was SpearTip. We obtained and reviewed and signed contracts. And I did, you know, it was important to say it's significant in our learning to use a technical defense attorney, somebody who specializes in this, because they speak a different language. They have resources to, you know, companies with Bitcoin, BitWallets and all of that. So it was really important to learn that. And then everything becomes privileged. All of our communication becomes privileged. So Craig, would you like to talk about our response to the attack?
Sure. So the obviously, you know, we moved into the recovery phase pretty quickly. Luckily, I had just purchased a physical server, so I had one just kind of sitting there waiting to be used. So I was able to fire up, you know, some new virtual servers that I knew were clean. I was able to then start the restore process. We still had an old traditional type backup where it was a file level backup. Unfortunately, it was not an entire virtual machine type backup. So the restore process was a bit longer than I would have liked, but you know, I was able to restore the shared directories for user files, and then went about restoring individual programs like Denise referenced for our housing department. For instance, they have a specific program that runs on an old Advantage database type system. So I worked with their support to restore the database, and then their support was able to reinstall all the program files around it, the web-based features, stuff like that. So it was a lengthy process to get everything back up and running fully. Yeah, eventually that was pretty much what I was doing around the clock, was just going system by system and restoring things to get the users back up online. Unfortunately, we had one system at the police department. It was an old document management system that had no internet access, no outside access, anything like that. It would just kind of sit there and run and serve its purpose by, you know, scan papers into a document management system. And we did not have a valid backup of that, unfortunately. That was the one reason we even started to negotiate with the bad actors and consider, you know, going down the road of getting the decryption key, was simply for that one program. Unfortunately, it still kind of irritates me if you can't tell. But yeah, so I'll let Denise talk about, you know, how that all worked with the negotiations.
Okay. So SpearTip was in that weekend, and they went through a lot of forensic stuff with Craig. And so we learned, you know, with kind of Monday, Tuesday timeframe, we learned how negotiations were going to work, best guess on demand, anticipated length of time to reach a settlement. And we were educated on how bad actors go about their business. Coveware was given a settlement authority of $50,000, and negotiations began via email from Coveware to the bad actors. So the initial demand for the decryption key was set at $80,000. They got back to us like almost immediately. And I guess that should have been our first clue, just the responsiveness. And we were elated, or I guess we weren't elated at the time. It was like $80,000 was way above. And so the negotiated settlement came in at $31,722.70. And we were just elated because it was far less than our $50,000 that we had budgetarily that we could really, I can't say really afford, but that we could afford. So that Wednesday, we honestly jumped on it. And that too was a lesson learned that I'll just reference a little bit later. So we transferred the funds through a local bank, and there's a whole lot you have to go through with that to prove that that you yourself are not the bad actors. So we transferred the funds, and we didn't get the decryption key, and they were silent, and then they were more silence, and then more silence. And by then we're wondering what the heck. And then the bad actors said they still want their $80,000. And we were not happy. And I won't even get into the anger and all that. But we just figured, you know what, we've got to breathe. We got to let it go, and we've got to move forward. So really that Thursday and Friday, we instructed the negotiators, we're not sending any more money. Then the bad actor said, okay, we'll go for $50,000. And I instructed the negotiators, do not have any more further communication with them at all. And we were receiving multiple messages from the negotiators that the bad actors were getting impatient, that we need to pay or they'll destroy the decryption key. The weekend is coming, they won't be happy. These were messages we were getting from Coveware, who was our negotiators, that they won't be happy. And it's like, really? So we were just looking at biding some time for Craig to still uncover documents throughout all of this. Craig was working seriously like 24 hours a day, and he was able to just open things up and get things going. And I told the negotiators, if you have to respond to them, just tell them to go pound sand. We want nothing more to do with them. And yeah, we were really kind of reprimanded by Coveware to say, we're making it harder for them to negotiate with these people in the future. And it's like, that wasn't my priority. So Craig, would you want to talk quickly about the response to our attack?
Yeah. So by that time, then, we had talked with the police department to say, long-term ramifications of not having this one particular document management system. And I think we came up with the solution that, if that system was not able to be recovered, we would have to, from the lawyers, have an official document to say, sorry, we can't go back and uncover those records because of this ransomware attack, yada, yada. So, we were going to be okay there. So that's why we just decided, forget it. We're not going to pay any more. And I believe that's when, Denise told them, just forget it, drop negotiations. And then Denise, did you want to go into the rest about the $1,500 and actually getting the key?
Well, yeah. So part of our contract with Coveware was $1,500 that we would pay for them to decrypt the decryption key. And since we didn't get that back, I told them I wanted our $1,500 back. So when we paid the ransom, we also paid Coveware at the same time. And later in the day, on Monday the 23rd, I received notification that Coveware was sent the decryption key. All of the sudden they had it. And I found that very interesting timing. I won't go into that anymore. But, and Craig said, we really don't need it. Craig, Craig got us back up and running. Finally, we agreed, okay, you can send it to us, whatever you want to do. And we sent it to SpearTip. I didn't want it launched. I didn't want us opening it up and launching it for fear that it might have been encrypted with something. I didn't know how all that worked. So we agreed to have it sent to SpearTip and let them run it to reassure us it hasn't been encrypted with something. And it came back fine. Instructions were sent to Craig on how to deploy it. And honestly, it didn't give us any information that Craig wasn't already able to get for us. So lessons learned. So in the end, no customer or personal information was breached. We went about 4 weeks with no emails. We didn't lose any data. A few more gray hairs, but a lot more wiser. And so my takeaways from all of this, and Craig, jump in if you feel, is just breathe. If this happens, just breathe. Take a minute. Call Margot and Susan. They are truly voices of reason. And again, just breathe. And even though we engage with experts, I think it's important to keep in mind they work for us. Don't be afraid to ask questions, get clarification of things. Cybercrime is tricky, and it speaks a very different technical language. Closely manage and document every step, all expenses, enlist the cyber attorneys, as all communication is privileged as long as they're copied on it. It's not subject to FOIA. And one thing that I'll just interject is we were told they're watching us. So to put something out in the media, go to the newspapers or radio, they're watching us. And the more that we were told, the more that we get information out there, the more likely our ransom would have gone up. So I thought that was very interesting. And, let's not just jump on the first negotiated ransom demand. I think there's room for negotiation. So some of the pros is the ability to control information, avoid speculation and leaks. Again, we were being watched. Things were changing hourly, and it's too much to keep updating everybody on. Maintain privileged communication and potential exposure in case there was any lawsuits and anybody had to be called to testify. It would limit who that would be. Some of the cons, with that tight, holding those things tight to our chest, some people felt left out. Some of the department heads felt that we didn't trust them because we weren't telling them everything that was happening every step of the way. And questions weren't being asked to their liking. And that was tough. That was really tough. But, we did what we did. And I don't know that we would really change it, that we just asked them to please understand. So from that, we have a more robust infrastructure. We made the decision in the end to restructure our IT department so that we could afford to employ specialty services. This resulted in structuring a separation agreement with our IT tech, again, so that we could afford to employ specialty services. We have the cybersecurity software. Craig implemented a backup solution with a third-party vendor and a third-party IT support solution. And Margot has negotiated an extremely more robust cybersecurity coverage for the entire membership. So unless there's any questions for us, I think that ends Park Forest's experience.
Okay. Well, thanks, Denise. That was very informative. I remember us going through that whole process with you. And I think ultimately in the end, it turned out well, but I know it was a lot of stress for you guys. So I'm going to talk about where your exposures are in cyber liability. And there's really kind of 4 areas that you can possibly deal with. So it's data compromise and breach, data compromise liability, cyber attack, and then ransomware and extortion. So you could have one of these. So you could just have a data compromise, or you could have all 4 of these types of exposures happen at the same time. And you heard Denise and Craig say that they did investigate to make sure that there wasn't a data breach. They found that there wasn't a data breach. They were just dealing with a ransomware case. So I said you can have one of them or you can have 4 of them. So you're talking about a data breach. That's the unauthorized exposure of personally identifiable information. Personally identifiable information is something that's beyond what the public knowledge is already. So a very, very, very basic general guideline is if you can't Google the information, then it's a breach. So an unauthorized exposure can happen from just a loss. So you lose a laptop, you have a laptop, sitting on top of your car, you drive away and the laptop, gets lost, leave it in a Starbucks, that kind of unintended just loss. Physical theft, somebody steals your laptop or somebody, comes in and copies data to portable media, or an accidental publication, which is just you publish something on a non-secure website, or you dump files and not shred them. And that kind of exposure is part of this as well. So the affected individuals are going to be your employees, your residents, and potentially third parties. So Illinois has a statute which requires notification. If you're a data collector and you're collecting personal information, then you have some requirements as far as giving notification. Some of the, again, general provisions are you have to give notice without unreasonable delay is the way the law reads. And depending on the circumstances, you have to provide somebody who has notice of a breach a toll-free number to consumer reporting agencies, to the Federal Trade Commission. You need to direct them to change their username, password, and security questions. And notice requirements are specific to all states. So not the same requirements may be in Illinois as in Indiana. So if you cross state lines, you may have more than one notification law that you need to follow. And Margie's going to share with you a little bit later that HSB actually has, and Denise referenced it too, has attorneys that specialize in this type of situation, and they specialize in the notification requirements, and they know them across the country. So that's one of the benefits with HSB. Okay, so you as a government agency, you are a data collector. Obviously, it makes sense. You're collecting information on your residents for water billings or whatever it may be. And the information, personal information, this is just kind of a list of the types of information that they would consider to be personal information that you might be, if you release, that could be a breach. So our second exposure is data compromise liability. So you have a breach, as we just talked about. So you've released information, or it's been lost, or it's been stolen, and it's used to commit a fraud or some other illegal activity involving a resident or an employee or a third party, and it causes them harm or damage. So this is a third party claim. So a third party who is injured by this, maybe the breach causes them to have an identity theft type of issue, and they suffer monetary damages, maybe even some emotional distress from having their identity stolen. So this is the type of claim that's going to come from a third party, and they're going to be seeking compensatory damages for whatever it is the harm that was committed. I don't know if you remember, I think it was in 2017, Equifax had a data breach, and they actually paid a $700 million settlement under a data compromise liability claim. Ultimately, people got $125 per person. So, it may not be perfect, but there is this exposure out there, and we're going to talk in a little bit. There is coverage out there as well. So here's the big one. This is the one that you hear about more and more. Okay, so ransom and extortion is a crime in which payment is demanded in order to stop the attack. You heard from Denise and Craig how that happens. Okay, so it can be it's carried out usually by using a legitimate file that a user is tricked into downloading or opening, and that releases the malware that causes the potential threat to publish data, or they can also encrypt the files, as we talked about, making them inaccessible. So this, as I said, we saw it kind of in the beginning. This seems to be, they seem to be targeting local governments or governmental agencies a little bit more. I guess they seem to think that they're more susceptible to these types of attacks. I think that, you know, part of their thinking is that local government may not have the same level of resources to dedicate to security, or their security teams may be stretched a little bit thinner than, say, in a big corporation who may have a whole IT department. So they use, as again, as Denise and Craig said, they use digital currency, so the Bitcoin, and that actually makes their tracing and prosecuting these guys is very difficult. A cyber attack is something that you're going to have malware, which is going to be, you know, sent into your computer system. It's going to cause direct physical loss or damage, destruction of your electronic data processing equipment or data and media. So this is a first party loss. This means there is actual damage to your system, to your computer system, or damage to your data or to your media. So you've all heard about phishing attacks. It can come through in this way, or just a malware, which is, you know, a software that's, again, sent into your system, and it can cause this type of damage. All right, so I am going to turn it over to Mike Mertens. He is with the Village of Willowbrook. They had a ransomware attack a couple of months ago. So Mike's been in municipal government for about 22 years, and he's been the assistant village manager with Willowbrook since 2019. And Mike, you can take over.
Great, thank you. Good morning, all. I would say it's an honor to be part of this, but it usually means that something went wrong, and that's why I'm on the call. So a little bit about Willowbrook, for those who don't know us. Small community, less than 9,000 people, less than 45 employees total. We have basically a water department, building planning, administration, and police. So we outsource a good portion of our services. Most of public works is outsourced. Our IT is all outsourced. We're in a fire protection district, and for all intents and purposes, we don't have a park district. So really small organization. So in one ways, that's good. In other ways, that's, you know, leaves a lot of blind spots, if you will. So our joy occurred pre-pandemic, if anybody can remember that far back. So the incident occurred on a Friday, March 6th. We were first notified by our public works foreman. He's the first one in the office. He goes down to the public works garage and water tower, tried to log on his computer at the water tower, and notepad came up that advised that all the data has been locked. And these are classic. It's almost like it comes from Nigeria, or, you know, the classic email spams. You know, you want return. It's never written in formal sentences. Write an email, help.me24@prontomail.com, or IT24support@coct.il. You know, it's classic stuff. So I'm sure after some panic from our public works foreman, at around 6 a.m, he texts our finance director. Our finance director, you know, for all intents and purposes, oversees our IT at the village, which means she coordinates our outside consultant. So she got the email at 6:30 a.m. So the text at 6:30 a.m. So she texts all the employees of the village to advise them that the servers have been down, and she contacted our IT representative, who was on our way to the office. So you could see this is a actual picture of our Public Works foreman's screen. Not as detailed as Parks Forests. Really just kind of that, we got your information warning shot. So, that's kind of how it all started. So I show up at the office on that Friday, 8 a.m., walk in the door, actually kind of feeling pretty good. I just got back from a vacation. So I was ready to start the weekend, right? And so our Public Works foreman comes into my office, advises me that the servers were down and he thought we'd been hacked. So I just thought he was, pulling a bad joke on me. I'm like, all right, I'm being pranked. It's 8 a.m. The caffeine hasn't kicked in yet, haha, I'm ready to go. So I try to log on my computer, nothing. So I immediately start making some phone calls, call our mayor, call our administrator, our finance director, and IT consultant show up, and we all congregate. So, at this point we determined, the servers are down, and that was, every now and then we'd have problems with our servers. So that wasn't a complete shock, but this was every computer. Desktops were inaccessible. The phone system was working, which was good, and the email system was working. So employees that had cell phones were able to communicate via email, and we determined that the water system was operating fine. There was no stop in services, and no problems with our water towers or any pumpage in and out. So that was good. So kind of the key roles. So the way our organization is divided up, as I mentioned, our finance director, she manages our IT at the village, and she handled all the communication with our consultant. So via texts and emails through her phone, and he was in the office shortly that morning. Our village administrator, he got the joy of dealing with our mayor and board members, as well as our police department and then neighboring agencies. So luckily our board was, really supportive of this issue. We expected a lot of, initially a lot of finger pointing, a lot of, blame, how did this happen kind of scenario. But they were very supportive. So that was really good. My role was really to manage the the attorney contacts, the IRMA contacts, and the centralizing of information. So similar to Denise, all the information flowed through me, and then I was the resource back out to the various departments. So, as we kind of moved forward in the morning, the first thing we did once our IT consultant got in, we had our employees just unplug all their terminals, just disconnect everything, because we didn't know where it was going, where it was spreading, those kinds of things. And then our IT consultant began to work on the servers. He determined that our servers were in fact corrupted, which was not good. So they were encrypted. Our file servers, luckily, about 2 years ago, we converted to a backup data drive system that backs up everything to the cloud on a continuous basis. So the backup drive seemed to be intact, which was great. We just had to determine at what point did we lose data. The email server, that's backed up to the cloud, so that wasn't affected. We did not lose any emails or any access to emails, although people had to use their cell phones to communicate initially. So those were all good considering the situation. We, got on the phones. We obviously notified all our board members of the situation. We didn't want them hearing anything from anybody at a local restaurant or, through other sources. We notified DUCOM. They handle our police dispatching. It's amazing. Once you tell one of these groups, it spreads like wildfire. We reached out to Tri-State Fire Protection District, DuPage Water Commission. By the time we got to DuPage, they had already heard. And, so this is literally minutes, after phone calls started. So we just make sure any outside agencies that kind of had a impact into our operations were made aware of it. So that morning, I had the pleasure of reaching out to Margie, kind of in a panic. I knew we had cyber insurance. I had no idea. I couldn't remember what our coverage plan was, what they covered, any of the details of that. So Margie sent off information on the plan that helped put some of our board members at ease on some of the financial impact and some of the things that we knew we needed to kind of jump on immediately. They put me in contact with HSB. Again, I thought this was a joke, Hartford Steam Boiler. But I guess if Berkshire Hathaway, which was a insulation company, can turn into a conglomerate, a boiler company can be a service provider. So, but they were great. We reached out to them and they were very helpful. So we got a copy of the coverage. HSB supplied us with kind of a response information sheet that highlighted, some very macro forensic IT providers, legal firms, credit monitoring, kind of the broader aspect of what we needed to focus on. So that was good as we tried to get our arms around it. So, as we tried to triage from my office, we had our police department reach out. They actually reached out to the FBI and the Secret Service. The Secret Service had a team that was readily available, which was great. They were here around noon that day on a Friday. So their agents, there was about 5 agents that showed up. They started conducting interviews, identifying infrastructure. They started doing a forensic acquisition, doing some memory dumps of information. We had some employees that were on vacation for the previous week, so their computers were never turned on. So those turned into our control computers. So we identified a couple of those. We had the computers that we knew wouldn't turn on. So our Public Works computer, my computer, a couple of the mayor's computer, a few of the computers that people tried to turn on right away that couldn't get access. Those were all infected. So they Secret Service collected the hard drives, and the infected servers were collected, and they went to task to try to identify the potential ransomware. So as we got into the day, I mean, this is just incredible how all this just really happened so quickly. All of our individual hard drives were corrupted. So any data that were stored on the individual desktops were lost. And sadly, we had a lot of computers or employees that would just casually save, files to their desktop versus the server, just as part of their normal day-to-day process. So all that information sadly was lost if individual people did that. So what we determined is that new server hard drives would need to be ordered, as well as new desktops for all the staff. Luckily, we don't have a lot of staff, so we had to order new desktops. We actually, in May of this year, were due to replace all of our desktops anyways. So when we made that painful phone call back to the board members saying, hey, we need to do an emergency purchase of servers and desktops, we knew after talking with HSB that those desktops The servers would be covered under the policy. Sadly, the desktops wouldn't. But because we were replacing the items a couple months later, realistically, we were just, paying for it now instead of paying for it in May. So, that wasn't as such a big hit financially. So as our IT consultant, he had a whole team come in with him. So we had about 4 guys sitting in a, kind of a tiny little closet, verifying that our backup drive was in fact not corrupted. And then we determined that the last backup that was not corrupted was about 3 hours into the day prior. So we lost about 3 hours worth of work from that Thursday, as well as any data that any employee put on their desktop. So our IT consultant actually had his firm bring in a temporary server. So over the weekend, they began transferring the data from our backup data drive that was stored in the cloud to the backup server. I'm thinking this takes this will be done in a quick, couple hours. Obviously, I didn't have the true background on that. They had to scan the data just to make sure it was clean. So the scanning process was time consuming. So as we got into, we thought it was all going to be up and running on that Monday, but the server was still, being backed up. We got additional machines ordered. We actually picked them up and had them delivered by the 11th. So, in the meantime, we, with the advice of Irma, contacted an outside legal firm because our local firm, that we use is really good at writing ordinances and election law and in the basic day-to-day stuff. But we wanted somebody who knew the ins and outs of cyber law and the do's and don'ts. So we retained an outside firm to assist in that and to help determine what the process was for the notification and in case any data was compromised. The village, in conjunction with the Secret Service, we attempted to connect with the threat actor to request a ransom. And this wasn't because we were trying to get some type of ransom key or unlock nature. It was really, we wanted to track down the bad guys and see if we can, find out who they were and try to, pass that information off to the Secret Service. But we got no response. We had our village administrator send out numerous emails, pretending that, we didn't have access to our system at that point, and no response. So Park Forest had mentioned, they were debating, how much information to get out there because they didn't want to affect the ransom. We had a kind of different debate going on in Willowbrook. We knew we didn't need to issue any ransom because we had our data. It was just a question of getting it off the backup drive and then onto a temporary server and ultimately onto a redeveloped server. So we were debating back and forth. I mean, do we, at that point, we didn't know if data had been breached. And if any data was lost to the dark web. So we made the choice on the 10th, which was shortly the week after that, to do a press release. We figured, this type of information, once it gets out to, the DUCOMs of the world and the fire protection districts and everybody else, it's going to get out. So we did a press release. That way, if people wanted to contact any of the agencies to protect their private data, they could, or if they wanted to freeze credit or any of that kind of stuff, that at least they had some information. So we did a press release on that. So on the 11th of March, we did get the desktops in. Those all had to be set up. So that was, a timely process to get people set up. Our first line of attack was our finance department, followed by our public works department. We had to get payroll done that week, and we had to get water bills out. So we wanted to get those systems up and running. First, our police department was at that point still receiving all calls from DUCOM via radio. They didn't have access yet to their computers. Their in-car computers were still working, but their desktops at the office was not. So what we did was kind of as we rolled into the next week, we slowly got people up and running off the temporary server. And, we had people who needed bits and pieces of information. We were able to pull that information off and give people temporary access as that information was slowly being transferred back to the server. So the village, as we talked with Irma and we talked with HSB, we wanted to do some additional forensic IT reviews and compromise assessments, because we didn't know at that point, what type of access the bad guys had, and if anything was still into the system. So we did 2 different programs with an outside consulting group, separate group from our current IT guys. We wanted a separate analysis of that. So we kept our day-to-day consultant working on just getting our system up and running. And then we had a separate IT group start on a forensic IT review. And that was to help determine if any data was exfiltrated. They helped assisting in identifying and remediating the attack vector for the malware, including any log analysis. They provided an incident report and recommendations on the incident containment and prevention. The compromise assessment, this is something that they kind of connected up to our servers once they were up and running. It was a in-depth point of time view of multiple potential vectors to provide answers to questions such as, are the in-place security controls effective? Were there any undetected malware and unwanted activities occurring within the infrastructure? And what applications are in use on and through the village networks, and do they pose a threat? So we needed to kind of have that assessment to make sure that, as we scanned all our information back, we determined it was clean, but was there anything hidden that we didn't catch? So it was determined through this assessment that the threat actor, I love these terms that the IT guys use, the threat actor, the bad guy, used a remote access via our water tower computer. That was patient 0. The bad guys used a remote access tool to drop onto the water tower computer via an executable file, a zip file. That contained the new Dharma variant. It's a crisis variant. But there was luckily for us, there was no evidence of access to any data through the attack. It really just locked everything up. Secret Service thought that it was just, you always hear about the bad guy sitting in mom's basement, just spraying doll fields, seeing what stick, they were thinking that it was not somebody trying to get anything to sell in the dark web. It was just somebody really screwing around and seeing what worked. Sadly for us, it worked. So there was no evidence that data. So this took a little bit of time because as we got into it, we rolled right into the governor's shutdown with the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of our servers and data information that the Secret Service had was at their office, and they were told they couldn't go in the office. Then we were further delayed because our team that we had worked on every time President Trump or Vice President Biden happened to come into Illinois or Wisconsin, they got directed into presidential security. So, it took a while for them to really get their arms around a confirmation of this information, but we were able to definitely determine that. So HSB, we were involved with them literally from day one, and they were involved in all the pre-approval of all the key steps. Anytime we needed to hire a consultant, hire an attorney, purchase anything, we gave them a call, sent them an email. They wanted to make sure that the group that we were working with was qualified if it wasn't someone that was already on their list, and that their rates were going to be, something that we weren't getting gouged because it was an emergency and we had to act quickly. So, but the communication was really effective between both IRMA and HSB. The coverage was important. Like I said, when I started this, I knew we had coverage. I just couldn't remember what it was. It was always one of those things that I thought I hoped we would never have to deal with. But as I shared that information with our board members, kind of gave them a peace of mind that, within reason, we had backup, and we had every time we needed to do something, whether it was a forensic review or legal review, those main things that we were experiencing, those costs were going to be covered sans our $10,000 deductible. So I kept a spreadsheet of everything that we contracted out for, we were billed for, share that with IRMA along the way, tracking what we sent IRMA and HSB. I've always contacted both at the same time, so there was no loss in communication on invoices, things of that nature. So to date, we spent about $133,000, on this. I'm sure there'll probably be a little bit more before we formally close this out. We had about $86,000 that was reimbursed to date. The difference was that $10,000 deductible, and then the desktops that was not covered under the plan. But again, those we were going to be replacing May of that year anyways. So, some of the takeaways from Willowbrook's perspective, for us, I don't know why emergencies always happen on Fridays. It just, everything from the Sterigenics issues that we dealt with the past year and a half to this, to other emergencies. It seems like it's on a Friday. All emergencies, are really chaotic in the first couple hours. So, getting elected officials and staff members and people like that are in the need to know on the same page was chaotic, but luckily we have a small group, so communication was fairly easy. Takeaways, this is kind of a pro and con. We outsource our IT, and which was great. We just didn't have a one-man shop internally with limited capacity. But on the flip side, they were able to, or some of the positives, they were able to bring in a full team. They were very responsive and meeting our needs with bringing in services, the servers, and bringing in extra people that were able to just tackle this. We had people here for a week and a half straight, getting computers set up and servers reinstalled and things of that nature. But as we were going through it, we realized that, this IT group, they were good, but we have so many different aspects of the organization that they didn't have a complete grasp of. And, so they're not experts on SCADA systems, for example. They're not experts on the 5 different systems that the police department uses, and they're not experts on our financial software and things of that nature. They understand how it all pieces together, but we realized that we do have some blind spots on having a group that maybe can look over the whole thing. So we're going to be investigating bringing in additional assistance to help us out. The other thing we found out is as we got into, once we got up and running and we got past the, panic stage and, the system was back up and running and we were, back to our day-to-day work kind of about 2 weeks into it, sans, the more nuanced aspects. We started getting a lot of different advice. We got advice from our IT consultant. We got advice from our outside consultant. And a lot of it was conflicting. Some of it, I'm sure, was people protecting their territory. Others were just different opinions on how to move forward. And what I felt was we didn't have an advocate to help us sort through all that IT advice that was presented. And so it was hard for us to filter that out and make a good recommendation to our board. So, that was one of the big things. We realized that we need to train our employees better. We, the kind of the casual save things to desktops because it's easier. Most of it tended to be not serious, but some people did lose some information. And so that was kind of a wake up call on training employees on how to do things. Government tends to be very good on things that are right in front of them. So they're really good at paving streets and fixing potholes. They're not the greatest when things are out of sight, out of mind. And as we went into this and as we had to deal with board members to, buy new server hard drives and buy new computers and spend money on IT forensic reviews, every one of those were a challenge because our board, I think, had a hard time grasping that software and IT and hardware are all integral assets of the community. And we really need to put appropriate focuses on that and appropriate budgets on that. They, like a lot of communities, sometimes that tends to be minimized. And, the more we get into it, the more we realize how connected we are. I can't imagine like Park Forest being without email for a month. That's how we all communicate these days. So, you don't miss it until it's gone, kind of thing. So, going forward, we've got some advice from our outside consultant, and we're working with our board to move forward with some more in-depth analysis and reviews as we get into the fall. And our intent is to do this information and reviews prior to our next budget session, so we can be hitting our next budget, which is ends in April, with some updated infrastructure, either improvements, software improvements, beefed up IT, all those types of things. So what we want to do is a macro security architectural review to study and uncover these systematic security issues that could be in the environment. So we want to try to find any weak points that we haven't identified thus far. And so we want to look at the entire system, everything from our public works department to our police department, our outside agencies that we use, that we do data dumps, whether it's to do Page Water Commission or to our banks. We just want to look at all those different things and see, who's got what security, where levels can be improved, any risks that can be improved, and what impact they might have. We want to do some continuing training for employees. So we're looking at doing some additional external penetration tests. So we want to try to have our system exploited and see where those vulnerabilities might be, and see what access and permissions might be limited and could be compromised. Same thing on the internal penetration test to see what's vulnerable and, take a scan one step further to attempt to exploit the vulnerabilities and determine what information is being exposed. So both internally and externally. And the other thing we want to try to do is some social engineering penetration testing. So, the best way I could describe this is when we got into the COVID, how many emails did everybody see with new COVID data and new articles on COVID, and people just inherently click on stuff. Because they're comfortable with the subject, or it's the hot subject of the day, or they think it's from a trusted source. And so we want to do some social engineering penetration testing to determine, to kind of train our employees and see where we got some gaps. So, we're not completely through this process because we know these next steps, we probably still have some gaps in our system. Not that I can point out currently, but we know they're out there. And, we as we got through this process and this incident, we realized that, we all have good intentions, but, internally, we just don't have the staffing that's an expert in all these things. So what questions to ask. So we do have to hire the right people and spend the right amount of resources on this. So that's kind of what we learned. We were lucky we didn't have to pay any ransom. And, for all intents and purposes, we didn't lose valuable data, and we didn't have any, data breach law. So we were lucky on that. But, who knows what tomorrow brings? It's Friday, so hopefully we won't have any more issues going forward. So I'll throw it out to any questions for anybody that has anything.
All right, so let's go through Irma's cyber coverage. Mike gave a nice little summary there in his slide. I appreciate that. So we have coverage for all of these exposures that we talked about and the issues that Park Forest and Willowbrook both had. So data compromise, the response expense. So the coverage will pay for hiring the experts to do the forensic examination, the legal review. So everything that Willowbrook and Park Forest were talking about when they were talking about hiring the IT specialist, spear tip, forensic specialist, the law, that's all covered under our data compromise and response expense. And there are other ones we pay for the notification to the individuals and the service to affected individuals. So, and that is a limit of $500,000. So up to $500,000 is available for that. Now there is $1 million aggregate, meaning that there is, you're not going to have any more than $1 million in coverage for anything that happens, but that is per member. So every member has $1 million, up to $1 million to pay for losses that they may incur with regards to this. The data compromise liability, as I said, that's the third party coverage. It has to arise out of the response, the data breach response expense coverage, but these are civil proceedings where somebody's looking for damages. So the damages, settlements, defense costs, prejudgment interest, all of that is going to be covered through the data compromise liability. Defense costs, again, all going to be covered. That is, the data compromise liability is included in the $1 million aggregate. So barring any other costs that you may have to pay through the cyber liability, you have up to $1 million in coverage for any type of lawsuit that might arise out of a data breach. These are two other types of third-party claims that there is also coverage for. I'm not going to go into real detail for them, but basically it's, if you breach a third party's business information, maybe you accidentally forward malware that causes somebody else to have a breach. That's network security. Electronic media is if you are infringing on somebody's right of privacy or copyright or title. And that's going to be the same coverage that you have in the data compromise liability. That's the $1 million included in that $1 million aggregate. So the cyber extortion, you do have coverage for that as well. And that would be coverage for any amount that you may pay in response to a cyber extortion threat. It's also going to cover the cost of the negotiator or the investigator for the cyber threat. This coverage is a little bit more limited than the others. So the HSB has sublimited their coverage for ransomware at $25,000. But the IRMA membership last year voted to take an additional $75,000 on top of that. So the first 25 would be paid by HSB, and then there's another $75,000 on top of that, which would be paid by IRMA. There is also that's in our general liability coverage. There's also limited coverage in our first party property coverage document, which is another $100,000. So, conceivably, depending on circumstances, you could have up to $200,000 in coverage for ransomware or extortion. Okay, computer attack, as we talked about. This is a first party loss. There has to be a direct physical loss or damage to the system, to the computer system, or to the data or the media. These are the types of costs that are going to be covered. This is what will be paid under this coverage. This is also included in that $1 million aggregate. So the system restoration, we're going to restore the system to the pre-attack level. So it's not going to buy you an entire new system. It's going to get you back to the functionality that you had before the attack. So just so that's clear, they're not going to purchase a whole new system for you. Business income is going to be the cost or whatever income you may have lost while your system is being fixed. And then getting the data recovery in place. All right, so this is just a picture of our cyber declarations. This gives you the whole kind of picture of what we have. Again, it's $1 million aggregate per member, and there's the deductible of $10,000. Okay, so I know we're running kind of close to the end. I hope you can stick with us because I'd really like you to get through. Margie is going to talk about what you need to do if you experience an attack, and then I just have some final thoughts. So bear with us. And Margie?
All right, thank you. Well, what to do when the unimaginable happens. First and foremost, you need to take the necessary steps to isolate the threat to prevent further damage. Unplug your systems. Have your IT people take whatever steps are necessary to stop further damage. And then you should start looking for your last backup. How far back do you have to go before you know the data is safe? And this will help you begin the process of determining how much data has been lost. If you need to incur any expenses, save everything. If you have to hire vendors, it's also important that you take screenshots of any ransom demands or messages from the bad actors. The next thing is you need to get your claim reported to IRMA. In the handout package that Lisa sent out to everyone this morning, the form that we need to have that's critical to get your claim started is this notice of loss. And if you
Margie, we have a question.
Okay.
Question reads, is there a detailed sheet that explains coverages in detail?
I do have a detailed sheet, which gives a discussion on each of the different coverages. So I will have Lisa send that out to everybody who's on the thing, and we could put it on the website as well with this presentation.
Okay. As I was saying, that we need to have this notice of loss form completed so that it can be submitted to HSB to start the claim rolling. This form is going to be located on the IRMA webpage under the claim form tab. So if you could get that going and then send that into the new claims, or if you want to call me or Susan, we just need to get this so that we can get the claim started. Another very important form to start completing is the cyber incident questionnaire form. This form does not need to be completed in order to get your claim started, but it's things that you need to start thinking about because these are the questions that HSB is going to have for you. We also recommend you notify law enforcement and work with your police departments to determine, do you need to involve the FBI? Do you need to involve the Secret Service? And then you need to begin identifying whether or not there's been any personal identifying information breach that Susan talked about, because that may trigger legal obligations or credit reporting obligations. And then we've listed out here some pre-approved vendors that have been pre-approved by HSB. I do want to caution you that HSB does want to be involved with the selection of the vendor, but in an emergency, these are the people that you can contact for ransomware. These are the people who will help you with ransom negotiations. In order to determine if a breach has occurred, you may need a forensic IT review, and these are the pre-approved vendors for that. And then you may need a legal review. If there has been, if there's a need for any response to state laws or federal regulations, these attorneys specialize in that type of thing. If you need to provide credit monitoring, depending on the information breached, these are the pre-approved vendors for credit reporting. And then in general, the claims process, once notice is given to IRMA, in this particular case, HSB is the actual carrier. They will be actually handling the claim. IRMA's role is to act as the intermediary between our members and HSB. Any expenses that you pay, as I said, save all your receipts. Those bills get submitted directly to HSB. They do a coverage review and approve the payment. Once they've done that, they send the approval notice to IRMA, and IRMA actually issues the check to the member. And there is a $10,000 deductible that does apply to this.
Yeah, I'm just going to hop in here too, Margie, just to say, if you ever have a question, you'll get a document from HSB which tells you what's covered and what's not covered. So if you have a question about one of those that you get, you could call either Margie or I, and we can kind of walk through that with you. Sometimes it's, can be kind of confusing. So you will get a notice from them saying this is what's approved and this is what is not approved. So again, just feel free to call either one of us if you have a question on that. So Margie, did you have anything else to add?
No, that's pretty much everything. We did provide a couple extra documents in there in your handout that kind of talk about what's going to happen. That's just more informational. But if ever anybody has any questions, Susan and I are available.
We've got one more here, Margie, and that's
Yes.
just asking if these vendors are listed on the IRMA webpage.
We can add the cheat sheet that lists all that out so that it will be under, we'll put it under cyber claims.
Okay, so just a couple of final thoughts. The first thing is we have insurance protection, and we did last year really expand the protection, that cyber liability coverage that we have. But, that alone isn't going to solve your problem. You need to make sure that you've got strong security in place. Here are some just basic cybersecurity best practices, keeping your software up to date, running your antivirus, using strong passwords. So this is just a list of the types of practices that you can use that could help in this type of situation. I think a backup system, I think you've heard from both Mike and Denise and Craig how important their backup system was. It can work to avoid paying your ransom. So Park Forest, they indicated that they paid because just that one little area, that police department, that was their decision as to why to pay ransom. But I think you could see through their presentation that if they didn't have the backup, if Craig didn't have the ability to go back and recreate that stuff, they would have paid potentially more than $80,000. And I don't think that the bad actors maybe wouldn't have stopped there. So that's why they're bad actors. Again, we had another, Willowbrook, obviously, that got their backup going, and they didn't really get a demand. They were back up and running. We've had also West Chicago had a cyber ransomware as well, and they had a great backup system, and they were able to recreate everything, and they took a very proactive approach. Their board basically gave the I don't want to say edict, but gave the authority to say they weren't going to pay any ransom at all. So, and you need to dedicate resources to cybersecurity. And I think you've heard both Mike and Denise and Craig say, what are they thinking going forward? They're going to be dedicating some more resources to increase the security of their systems. So IRMA has contracted with a consultant called Prescient. They're going to be offering some training for us specific to cybersecurity. So those are the 3 sessions that they'll be having, and you will be getting obviously notifications of all of this. I think we are hoping to get these done by the end of the year. So that will be coming out. They are also going to be available to provide our members cybersecurity assessments, and there'll be a preferred rate for our members if you want to contact them and have that assessment done. And then they are also going to provide us like a policy library and a cyber toolkit that the members will be able to access, to kind of help getting through, making sure your security is there, what kind of policies should you have in place, type of training should you be doing for your employees, all of those types of things. So Prescient will be a very good resource for IRMA and for the members. So that is what we have. If anybody has any questions, we will take those now.
Yeah, there's one in the queue that says, does IRMA or HSB require us to have a multi-factor authentication on our IT systems for coverage?
At this point, no. I know that question came up the other day as well. So that is not one of the questions, one of the underwriting questions that HSB has. They don't require them to have that, you to have that in order to have the coverage. I don't know if that's going to change. Depending, next year we've bound for this year. So this year we're fine. If something comes up next year, then obviously we'll be working with the members to get that addressed. The other thing that I just wanted to mention very quickly is that Prescient is also going to help me in particular, kind of with our underwriting information. What information do we want to get from the members to help market our program and maybe get some more, broad coverage? So you may be seeing, I'm going to warn you right now, you may be seeing more questions, different questions when the underwriting questionnaire comes out in February and March relating to cyber liability. So they may be a little bit more in depth. And again, if questions come up on what you need to be answering or what how you need to address it, then you contact me, and we can talk with Prescient about it. So, but I know we had that question this week. So no, at this point in time, HSB is not requiring a multi-factor authentication. Okay, so if you have any questions or concerns going forward, or any questions, you have a claim or concern about a claim, even if you think that there might be a claim and you're not sure, you think that maybe some data was breached, but you're not sure, you should contact us, because we can put you in touch with HSB, and they're very good about looking at it and making a determination as to whether or not you think we need to put you in touch with the vendors or in touch with experts to make those determinations. So even if you just have a slight concern that something may have happened, contact either Margie or I, and we can put you in touch with HSB, and hopefully it's no problem at all, but if it is, we can get in on the ground floor. And with that, if there are no questions, I thank you for your time this morning. We went a little bit over, and I appreciate your hanging in there with us. So have a good day.
And really quickly, one final reminder, as you exit today's webinar, you will be taken to an evaluation. We ask that you do complete that survey, as it is going to help our IRMA team as we continue to try and enhance our ability to deliver these services. And as Susan said, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
All right, David, I think that went well.
Yep.
It was a lot of info. Oh, I should stop recording. Hold on.
Yeah, I was like, hold on, I gotta stop that.